Imagine this. There has been a string of unsolved murders in your town. Naturally, this is extremely disturbing, as your neighborhood has always been pretty peaceful and quiet. As far as you know, all your neighbors are decent people, but you can't help looking at them a little differently. Could your next-door neighbor be a serial killer flushing human remains down the toilet? There's always a possibility. And these 3 stories we're about to tell you will confirm your paranoia, so stay tuned. Fred and Rose West. Arguably one of the most infamous true crime cases is Fred and Rose West, back in 1994 after it emerged. Born into a family of farm workers in Herefordshire in 1941, the builder moved to Gloucester in 1962. He married Rose in 1972 when she was 18. The pair had been having an affair since she was 15, and this was Fred's second marriage. The two sexually abused and murdered several young women, including their own daughters. Little was known about the pair and what went on in their house of horrors, but it was later revealed they sexually assaulted, murdered, and dismembered at least 12 people, with 9 bodies later found on their property at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester. What's more sinister is that their daughter's remains, Heather Ann, were found in their garden. Fred also used to joke that if their other children didn't behave, they would wind up under the patio with their sister. Bodies of all 12 victims were found buried at their homes in the city. It was a chance conversation between a group of school children and a police officer in Gloucester that started the investigation in 1992. The West's trail of murders was uncovered by Detective Constable Hazel Savage, who heard about the West family joke, which the children told social workers that the couple's missing daughter was under the patio. In 1994, West admitted to murdering his daughter. The admission would lead police to the West's House of Horrors, where officers found the bodies of 9 girls and young women, including West's daughter, buried in the cellar or garden. Heather's remains were the first to be uncovered. During the search, the lower part of the house was virtually dismantled as police kept finding more bodies. West was charged with 12 murders, but hanged himself in his remand cell in 1995 before facing trial, leaving his wife to face the courts alone. Rose became one of the most notorious female mass killers in Britain when she was jailed that year for the murder of 10 young girls and women. 25 years after the news broke, Joelle Brogan lifted the lid on what it was like to live on the same road, just meters from where their horrific crimes took place. She told Metro UK, "Finding out that our neighbor was a serial murderer of young women changed the lens in which we looked at the past and made it more sinister than it seemed at the time." Discussing the ordeal, Joelle added, "One thing I have learned is that things aren't always as they seem, and being brave on your own is perhaps not wise. But being brave as a community may help save someone's life." Anthony Sowell. Anthony Sowell was a guy who liked to sit on his front steps drinking King Cobra malt liquor for $1.50 a bottle, sometimes in the company of a woman. He was the guy who hung around the corner convenience store bumming change off his neighbors. In January 1978, when he was 19, Sowell joined the Marines, where he became a rifle sharpshooter and won 2 Good Conduct medals during stints in Okinawa, Japan, and Camp Pendleton, California. In 1985, having risen to the rank of corporal, Sowell left the service. Sowell seemed so harmless that when he invited neighbors over for a barbecue in his driveway, they came. So benign that when he beckoned women inside his house that smelled of death, they apparently went willingly. The truth is, between 2007 and 2009, the former U.S. Marine murdered 11 women. He lured his victims, who were all black women, to his house with promise of drugs and alcohol. After sexually assaulting them, Sowell killed most of his victims by manual strangulation, earning him the nickname the Cleveland Strangler. He hid or buried the remains in his home and yard. When the house was demolished, the buried bodies were finally discovered. Among the findings was a skull, which he had wrapped in a paper bag and placed in a bucket. The home where Sowell, also known as the Cleveland Strangler, lived was located right next door to a small sausage plant. Neighbors didn't know it was actually the smell of the corpses of 11 women slowly decaying in Sowell's home. Unbeknownst to most neighbors, Sowell was a registered sex offender who checked in with authorities from time to time and fooled people into believing he was just another guy trying to scrape out a living. Sowell was convicted of multiple crimes and was put on death row. According to 52-year-old LeBaron Simpson, if it's up to the people in the neighborhood, he probably never would have got caught, because he didn't cause any problems around here. Fawcett Best, the owner of Best Chicken and Pizza, a restaurant across the street from Sowell's house, said, "Nobody could imagine that this man was capable of doing what he was doing." Dennis Nilsen. Dennis Nilsen is undoubtedly one of the most prolific and notorious serial killers of the modern age. So much so that the terrifying tale of his heinous killing rampage throughout the late 70s was adapted for an award-winning ITV police drama back in 2020. Nilsen was born on November 23, 1945, to a Scottish mother and a Norwegian soldier father. His parents split whilst he was young, as his armed forces father neglected his family, focusing the majority of his attention on the Free Norwegian Forces. Nilsen claimed to have discovered he was gay during his early teenage years, something which he found confusing and shameful. He reportedly fondled both his brother and sister during this period, claiming to have been unsure about his own sexuality. As a result of this, his brother began to taunt him about being gay and belittled him in public. Nilsen joined the Armed Cadet Force at age 14, enlisting for 9-year service in September 1961. Following his 11-year military career, he decided to join the Metropolitan Police, moving to London to commence with training. As a miserable junior constable in London, he began to drink alone in the evenings and began visiting gay bars where he engaged in casual sexual liaisons with other men. His killings began in 1978. Nilsen frequented gay bars in London's West End and targeted runaways, homeless boys, drug users, and sex workers. Similar to American serial killer John Wayne Gacy, many of Nilsen's young victims were selected deliberately because they were less likely to be reported missing. He'd lure them to his home with the promise of food and alcohol, and once they had fallen asleep, he'd strangle them to death. Between the years of 1978 and 1983, Dennis Nilsen is known to have killed a minimum of 12 men and boys, and is believed to have attempted to kill a further 7 people. He initially confessed in 1983 to having ended the life of around 15 or 16 victims. But it was not the 15 missing victims that helped the authorities catch on to him, or even the survivors who did report their encounters to the police. Nilsen was a model citizen, and his neighbors had no idea they were living next door to a serial murderer. Most people trusted him because of his profession. How could someone who's supposed to protect humans be a serial killer? But that wasn't the case with Dennis Nilsen. It was not until a clogged drain pipe in his flat was reported. You see, Nilsen had been disposing of his victims' bodies in his second apartment. When a plumber found 4 fingers and some human flesh in the building's drain pipes, the police entered Nilsen's apartment, immediately smelled death, and arrested him. He initially confessed to ending the lives of 15 young men and boys, and after searches of that location and that of his previous flat, authorities recovered 11 bodies. Sadly, only 8 of Nilsen's 15 victims have been officially identified. Nilsen pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, with his defense arguing that he was insane. He was found guilty of 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder and was sentenced to life in prison in November 1983. Dennis Nilsen served 34 years of his sentence before he died in prison at the age of 72. The serial killer also produced 250 hours worth of tapes while in prison, co-wrote a biography called Killing for Company in 1985 with Brian Masters, as well as his own memoir, History of a Drowning Boy, over a period of 18 years. It begs the question, how well do we really know our neighbors? Do you trust yours? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel for your regular dose of whodunits. See you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.